warning, you say?" Old woman Eleanora Vance smiled, her gentle expression from yesterday now as sharp as a razor's edge. "Oh, that's the best part, young man. The bait is useless unless the fish believes it's swimming into a trap of its own accord." Her eyes glinted with a cruel wisdom, as if she had seen into every corner of Caleb's soul. She knew that the so-called warning wasn't meant to deter him, but to lure him in a deadly invitation. To understand the cruelty hidden behind her smile, one must return to that fateful day, the day Caleb Thorne, a young, arrogant gunslinger, believed he was the luckiest man in the West. Caleb Thorne believed the world ran on two things: fear and greed. He had spent his entire life learning to recognize and exploit them. He could read a poker player by the way they licked their lips with a good hand, or spot a lying merchant by a millisecond of hesitation in their eyes. To Caleb, people were open books, and he was a voracious reader. Today, in the town of Harmony Creek, a name dripping with irony for such a dusty, barren place, he felt he was about to read the best one of his life. The auction took place in front of the old courthouse, its white paint peeling like a snake's skin. The crowd was small but consisted of high-quality individuals. Caleb recognized well-known ranchers, men whose pockets were heavy with the bounty of land and livestock. They were here for one reason: the late Hartwell's estate, 12 acres, a sturdy log house, and most importantly, a well that still held water in the dry season. It was a jewel in the desert. "Starting at $20, the auctioneer called out, his voice listless as if he didn't even believe his own words. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Caleb narrowed his eyes, observing. This was the first anomaly. $20 for a fortune like this was an insult. He saw men who could afford 100 times that amount just standing still, staring at their worn boots or fiddling with their hat brims. There was no chatter, no calculated nudges, only a heavy hesitation, a strange and silent agreement. Caleb's gut, the same one that had saved him from losing poker hands and crooked deals, was screaming. Where there was a lack of logic, there was an opportunity. He wouldn't play by their rules. He would make his own. 25 cents. Caleb's voice rang out, clear and defiant in the still air. It was like a stone thrown into a calm lake, the ripples spreading through the crowd. All eyes turned to him. The looks weren't of contempt for a pauper, but of astonishment, almost shock. The auctioneer blinked, his bushy mustache twitching. "Son," I said, $20. "I heard you clearly," Caleb replied, a casual smile on his face. "And my price is 25 cents. Does anyone want to bid higher?" He looked straight into the eyes of the wealthy ranchers. They avoided his gaze. He saw one farmer shake his head vigorously, whispering something to his wife. His wife quickly pulled their young son behind her, as if Caleb were a plague. The emotion radiating from them wasn't competition, but a profound pity. They looked at him as if he had just signed his own death warrant. 25 cents, going once, the auctioneer called, his voice now sounding like a funeral dirge. No one spoke, no one moved. Caleb felt a jolt of exhilaration run down his spine. He was right. There was a secret here, a secret big enough to scare an entire town, and they were handing it to him for the price of a penny candy. Just then, the crowd parted. An old woman with silver-white hair and kind blue eyes stepped forward. She was small, her back stooped with age, wrapped in a faded woolen shawl. She was Eleanora Ellie Vance, someone he had never met but who felt like the town's very soul. She placed a thin, wrinkled hand on his arm. "You don't want that place, young man," she whispered, her voice fragile but full of urgency. "Some bargains aren't worth the price. Let the past stay buried." The warning, instead of deterring Caleb, only added fuel to the fire of his curiosity and ambition. If a woman who looked so kind and respectable had to step forward personally, the secret was bigger than he had imagined. "Thank you for your kindness," Caleb said politely, but his eyes never left the auctioneer. 25 cents, going twice. The silence stretched on. Last call, sold. The wooden gavel hit the block with a dry snap, like a final period. Sold to the gentleman in the brown coat for 25 cents. Immediately, the crowd dispersed. They turned and walked away, quickly and decisively, with no one looking back. It was as if the auction's end marked the beginning of a disaster. Caleb completed the paperwork in an awkward silence, the auctioneer's hand cold and clammy as he handed over the deed. The road to his new house was a trail almost swallowed by weeds. Caleb rode alone, his sense of victory mixed with a heightened sense of caution. The log house appeared at the end of the road, looking more solid than he had expected, built from huge pine logs. But the windows were black with dirt and cobwebs, like blind eyes staring at him. He dismounted, his hand on his pistol, and cautiously stepped inside. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was stagnant and smelled of neglect. Light filtered through cracks in the roof, painting beams that hung in the dusty air. The only furnishings were a table, 2 chairs, and a cold stone fireplace. Too simple, too normal. Disappointment began to set in. Had he been fooled? Was the whole town just playing a joke on a stranger? He started a systematic search, tapping every floorboard, looking for a hollow space, a different sound. Nothing. He slumped to the floor, scanning the room again in frustration, and then he saw it. It wasn't an obvious detail, it was a subtle anomaly. In the very center of the room, where the light was brightest, there was a perfectly square patch of floor. Caleb knelt down, running his fingers over the wood. The grain of these planks ran in the opposite direction from the rest of the floor. He looked closer. The cuts were straight and sharp, not natural, but made by a skilled saw. And the gaps, they were free of dust or dirt. They were sealed with a layer of black, shiny pine tar that had hardened like stone over the years. A slow smile spread across Caleb's face. There it was. He hadn't been wrong. This wasn't a regular trapdoor. It was a seal. Someone had sealed something here, not just to hide it temporarily, but to bury it forever. He stood up, brushing the dust from his pants. He had bought a secret for 25 cents, and now it was time to find its true value. He needed a crowbar. If the town of Harmony Creek was a stage, then Abernathy's general store was where the main act was performed. Caleb Thorne, in his arrogant naivety, walked in unaware that he wasn't a customer, but the lead actor who had just stepped into the spotlight. The store was a cramped space filled with the smells of leather, tobacco, and ground coffee. A few customers were lazily browsing, but the moment the small bell on the door announced Caleb's presence, all activity stopped. The silence was so sudden that Caleb could hear the buzzing of a fly hitting the window pane. Mr. Abernathy, the scrawny shopkeeper with perpetually scared eyes, was so startled he dropped a stack of canned meat onto the wooden floor, creating a jarring clang. Oh my, he stammered, fumbling to pick them up, his shaking hands making the task clumsy. Caleb walked to the counter, placing a few coins on the worn wood surface. He enjoyed this subtle chaos. A crowbar, the best you have. Yes, right away, Abernathy replied, not daring to look Caleb in the eye. He rummaged behind the counter and placed a shiny, brand-new steel crowbar on the counter. Caleb took it, feeling the weight and cool metal. He turned, leaning against the counter, and scanned the store. Everyone was covertly watching him, then quickly turning away when their eyes met his. He decided to add more fuel to the fire. Fixing up the house on Crow Hill, he said casually, his voice loud enough to cut through the silence. Just bought it this morning. Seems it needs some tending to. If possible, the air in the room became even thicker. A young woman choosing fabric quickly grabbed her daughter's hand, her face pale. The blacksmith, looking at a set of harnesses, suddenly started coughing. Caleb could almost feel their palpable fear. They are really good actors, he thought to himself, a smile almost breaking through. This secret must be truly terrible. Just then, the bell on the door chimed again. This time, its sound wasn't out of place, but like a prearranged signal. Silas Blackwood walked in. His arrival was like a rare bird of prey wandering into a chicken coop. His perfect charcoal grey wool suit was a stark contrast to the faded work clothes around him. His leather shoes were so polished you could see your reflection in them, and a golden hawk lapel pin gleamed under the lamplight. He didn't walk, he strode, exuding an air of innate wealth and power. His eyes swept the room, his gaze passing over the townspeople as if they were objects before settling on Caleb. He recognized the stranger holding the crowbar. A glint appeared in his eyes. "You," Silas said, his voice low and resonant, not a question but a statement. "You're the one who bought the Hartwell property." Caleb's lip curled into a smirk. The play was getting more interesting. "I'm not the one. My name is Caleb Thorne. And yes, I am the new owner of that land. Is there a problem?" Silas moved closer, completely ignoring everyone else. He stood opposite Caleb, the distance between them close enough for Caleb to catch the faint scent of expensive cologne. "I'm Silas Blackwood," he announced, as if the name were an explanation in itself. "And I won't beat around the bush. I know there's something hidden in that house. Something that belongs to my family. Something my father searched for years before he passed. I don't care what it is, I just need to get it back." Caleb suppressed a smile. A family story. A nice touch. It added urgency and legitimacy to his greed. "Is that so?" Caleb feigned surprise. "I didn't see anything but dust and cobwebs." "Don't play games with me, Thorne," Silas growled, his arrogance starting to crack with impatience. "This whole damn town knows the story. I'll give you $5,000 for the entire property. Right now, cash. You just sign the papers and get out of here. Consider it a tidy profit for a day's work." $5,000. The number rang in Caleb's head. It was an escape, a new beginning. But greed, once stirred, was a hungry beast. Caleb knew he held the upper hand. He had seen the desperation in Silas's eyes. $5,000, Caleb scoffed, his smile full of mockery. "Mr. Blackwood, do you think I was born yesterday? Something that can silence an entire town in fear. Something a rich man like you has to personally come out and make such a generous offer for. It must be worth much more than that. Maybe I should use this crowbar myself and see what it is." He held up the crowbar, tapping it lightly against his palm. It was a silent threat, and it hit its mark. Silas's face darkened. He gritted his teeth, his jaw muscles clenching. "You're making a big mistake, Thorne. The only mistake is underestimating the value of your goods," Caleb retorted. "Your offer is laughable." A tense silence fell over the store. Silas stared at Caleb, his eyes like smoldering embers. Caleb calmly met his gaze, his heart pounding, but his expression unchanging. This was the poker game of his life. Finally, Silas let out a frustrated breath, a sound of defeat. "Fine, you win. $7,000, not a penny more. That's my final offer. Take it or go face whatever's waiting in that house yourself." Inside, Caleb was cheering. 7,000. He had done it. He had driven up the price without even knowing what he was selling. "All right then, sir," he said, feigning reluctance. $7,000. But I want the cash, right here, right now. Silas Blackwood nodded angrily. He pulled out a thick alligator skin wallet and began counting crisp $100 bills onto the counter. The rustle of the paper was the sweetest sound Caleb had ever heard. Mr. Abernathy hurriedly brought out the deed and ink pen, his hands still trembling. The transaction was completed quickly with the entire store as an audience. Caleb signed his name, took the thick stack of money, and felt its promising weight in his jacket pocket. He turned, walked out of the store without another word, not bothering to glance at the stunned townspeople. He mounted his horse, spurred it into a gallop out of Harmony Creek, red dust kicking up behind him like a cloud of victory. He had only one thought in his mind. He had tricked all of them. He, a stranger with only 25 cents, had walked in and left with a fortune. He felt he was the smartest, most cunning man in the world. Unbeknownst to him, behind his back, as his silhouette disappeared over the hill, Silas Blackwood turned to Mr. Abernathy and winked. The play was a smashing success. The fish had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Caleb Thorne rode like the wind, leaving Harmony Creek and its foolish inhabitants behind. The wind whipped at his face, but he didn't feel cold. He was warmed by the fire of triumph and the $7,000 safely tucked into his inner jacket pocket. Every few minutes, he reached in, just to make sure the stack of money was still there, feeling the crispness of the paper and the weight of success. He had been riding for nearly an hour, and the initial excitement had settled, giving way to more rational thoughts. He stopped by a small, gurgling creek to let his horse drink. He sat on a rock, took out the money, and counted it again. Still, $7,100 bills, brand new and crisp. It was all real. But as he stacked them back up, a small, almost insignificant detail caught his eye. All the bills had consecutive serial numbers. A normal person wouldn't have noticed, but Caleb wasn't a normal person. He had lived by paying attention to the small details. Money circulating among people, passing through hundreds, thousands of hands, would never have consecutive serial numbers like this. This stack of cash, it looked like it had been pulled straight from a bank. A wealthy man like Silas Blackwood could do that. But why would he carry such a brand new stack of bills to a remote town? Had he prepared for this negotiation in advance? A discordant note. Then he thought about the play in the store. Their fear. It was too excessive, too uniform, like a chorus conducted by an invisible maestro. No one broke ranks. No one showed any doubt. They all played their parts perfectly, too perfectly. And old Ellie's warning, he remembered her voice, her urgent gaze. It was so genuine he had almost believed it. But now, thinking back, it seemed like a detail added to give the story authenticity, a necessary spice to make the dish more appealing. The bait is useless unless the fish believes it's swimming into a trap of its own accord. The phrase suddenly echoed in his head, no longer a whisper but a roar. He had been so focused on the bait, the secret under the floor, that he forgot he himself could be the fish. A shiver ran down his spine, unrelated to the evening breeze. He jumped to his feet. No, it couldn't be. He was a predator, not the prey. But doubt, once it germinated, grew as fast as weeds. He couldn't continue his journey with this dark cloud hanging over him. He had to know the truth. He tied his horse to a thicket out of sight, checked his pistol, and began walking back. He didn't take the main road, but climbed the hillside, moving through bushes and rocks, using every skill his nomadic life had taught him to remain undetected. As night began to fall, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, he had returned to a vantage point overlooking the entire town of Harmony Creek. The town wasn't in a state of fearful silence. On the contrary, it was more lively than ever. A large bonfire was lit in the middle of the square, the dancing flames casting strange shadows on the walls of the buildings. The twang of a banjo blended with the sound of cheerful laughter. The whole town was there, not hiding in their homes, but celebrating. And then, Caleb saw the scene that shattered his illusion into 1,000 pieces. Silas Blackwood, the rich and arrogant man, was standing by the fire. His expression was no longer one of annoyance, but of satisfaction. He was handing over a portion of the money Caleb's money to old woman Eleanora Ellie Vance. She took the money, nodding gravely, and then the whole town cheered. Mr. Abernathy clapped the blacksmith on the shoulder. The auctioneer was doing a clumsy poker with the woman who had dropped her basket of eggs. They were not oppressed victims. They were a theatrical troupe, and they had just finished a brilliant performance. Caleb felt his blood run cold. Anger flared, hot and bitter. But immediately after, another feeling arose, strange and unsettling: admiration. He had been conned spectacularly, cruelly, and perfectly by the very people he had looked down on. He walked down the hill, no longer hiding. He strode directly into the middle of their party. The merriment died as if doused with cold water. The banjo music stopped. All eyes turned to him, astonished and slightly wary. Silas Blackwood took a step back. his hand subconsciously moving to the pistol tucked inside his jacket. But Caleb didn't look at him. He only looked at old Ellie, who was calmly sitting on an old armchair brought into the square, holding a small glass of wine. She looked at him, not with surprise, but almost as if she had been waiting. "What an excellent play," Caleb said, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. "And I'm guessing you're the playwright, aren't you?" Silence hung in the air. The entire town held its breath. Old Ellie took a sip of wine, her blue eyes, in the flickering firelight, no longer kind but sharp and wise. "Not so much a play," she said, her voice slow and clear. "I prefer to call it a tradition. You're smarter than the others, young man. Most of them, once they have the money in their hands, never come back. Greed is an effective blindfold," she explained, her voice echoing in the stillness. Harmony Creek was a forgotten town, left behind by the railroad and government promises. They had no gold mines, no fertile land. They only had their wits and their unity. The log house was a legacy, but also a stage. The secret under the floor was nothing but pebbles and old newspapers from 20 years ago. "Every few years," she continued, "a greedy person from the outside world hears the rumors we ourselves concocted. Someone like Silas here." She gestured with her chin toward Blackwood, who just nodded awkwardly. "Always believes he can use money to buy buried secrets. But he needed a reason to believe, proof. And I was that proof," Caleb said, finally understanding. "A legitimate buyer, a gullible stranger, led by greed, who would discover the secret and make it real." "You played the part very well, Caleb Thorne," old Ellie conceded. "But your warning?" Caleb asked. That was the final piece, the detail he had trusted the most. "You tried to stop me." And that was when old Ellie's smile became as sharp as a razor, a smile containing the wisdom of generations of survivors and tricksters. "My warning, you say," she said. "Oh, that's the best part, young man. The bait is useless unless the fish believes there's a danger lurking." Caleb stood frozen in the square. He had lost completely. He could draw his gun, but he knew he wouldn't get out of here alive. He could turn around, swallow his pride and disappear, taking the bitter lesson and the humiliation with him. But Caleb Thorne wasn't a quitter. He looked at the old woman, at the faces around him, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had found where he belonged. He walked over, sat down on a wooden barrel opposite old Ellie, ignoring the wary looks from the entire town. "You're right," Caleb said, his voice now completely calm. "Greed is a blindfold, but so is arrogance. How many times have you put on this play? 10, 15? Sooner or later, someone won't turn back here, but will go straight to the federal marshal and tell him about a town of con artists." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Your play is good, but it has a flaw. You always need a stranger. And a stranger, as you just saw, can't be controlled." He looked directly into old Ellie's eyes, a look of challenge and proposition. "You need an insider, someone who can seek out bigger fish, greedier ones, and lead them into the trap more professionally. Someone who understands greed because he was just blinded by it himself." Old Ellie watched him intently, a spark of curiosity in her sharp eyes. She said nothing, but a subtle, almost imperceptible smile was forming on her lips. "The play is over," Caleb said, standing up, "but the audition for the next one, perhaps, has just begun." He turned, walking slowly out of the square, out of the circle of bonfire light, and back into the darkness. He didn't look back, but he could feel dozens of pairs of eyes following him. Caleb Thorne may have lost 25 cents, but he felt he had just invested in a completely different future, one more interesting than anything $7,000 could ever buy.